Hours after taking the oath of office, Joe Biden ushered in a raft of radical changes that kicked off the Democrats' quest to undo Donald Trump's legacy as the 45th President of the United States. Rushing to dismantle his legacy, President Biden wasted no time signing a huge stack of executive orders, memorandums, and proclamations to repeal Trump's achievements rather than build his own. In this special report, Sky News breaks down the Democrat machine's scheme to erase Trump's achievements, the impeachment dividing Congress to prevent him from ever leading America again, and the concerted effort by the left to deplatform conservatives. Despite an inaugural address that called for unity and compromise, with the stroke of a pen, Biden's first actions as president were aimed at destroying Trump's achievements he didn't agree with, including overhauling the pandemic response, tearing down his anti-immigration policies, and embracing a progressive agenda on the environment and diversity that his predecessor spent years blocking. 9 of those 17 day one actions directly reversed Trump's policies.
There's no time to start like today. I'm going to start today. The compounding crisis of COVID, that is COVID-19, along with the economic crisis following that, and climate crisis, and racial equity issues, and some of the executive actions I'm going to be signing today are going to help change the course of the COVID crisis, and we're going to combat climate change in a way that we haven't done so far, and advance racial equity and support other underserved communities. We're going to rebuild our economy as well.
Biden put himself on display as a symbol of the great divide in American politics between the Democrats and the Republicans. His executive actions, signed at a ceremony at the White House, initiated the reversal of a slew of the Trump administration's environmental policies, including revoking the permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, reversing rollbacks on vehicle emission standards, undoing decisions to cut the size of national monuments, and enforcing a temporary moratorium on oil and natural gas leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Biden then pressed on with a temporary 60-day suspension of oil and gas permitting on federal lands and waters, standing in stark contrast to Trump, who had sought to maximize the production of oil, gas, and coal on federal acreage. Biden's day one executive actions included immediately lifting a travel ban on 13 mostly Muslim-majority and African countries, incorrectly referred to as a, quote, Muslim ban, implying it blocked only Islamic followers. He halted construction of the US-Mexico border wall and reversed a Trump order preventing migrants who were in the United States illegally from being counted for congressional districts. He ordered efforts to preserve deferred action for childhood arrivals, a program known as DACA, which Trump sought for years to end, that has shielded hundreds of thousands of people who came to the US as children from deportation since it was introduced in 2012. The Homeland Security Department announced a 100-day moratorium on deportations for certain non-citizens after Biden revoked one of Trump's earliest executive orders, making anyone in the country illegally a priority for deportations. That's not it. Biden's most radical proposal is an immigration bill sent to Congress that proposes opening a path to citizenship for millions of immigrants living in the United States unlawfully. Republican Senator Ted Cruz ripped into Biden's decision in a statement, saying, "It is deeply troubling that most of Biden's first acts as president were to protect illegal immigrants and encourage illegal immigration at the expense of American jobs and workers. These actions illustrate that today's Democratic Party puts people here illegally, or attempting to come here illegally, before American workers." Biden also reversed several of Trump's withdrawals from international arrangements, beginning with the process of rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, a global pact created during the Obama-Biden administration to rein in the projected effects of climate change. Re-entering the international accord takes a month, meaning the United States will only have officially been out of the deal since November. Biden has said he plans to set the country on a path to net zero emissions by 2050. The Trump administration had abandoned the Paris Agreement, saying the accord would impose intolerable burdens on the American economy. Meanwhile, China would be allowed unfettered emissions growth until the end of the decade.
As of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord and the draconian financial and economic burdens the agreement imposes on our country. I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz, again, in a tweet said, "By signing this order, President Biden indicates that he's more interested in the views of the citizens of Paris than in the jobs of the citizens of Pittsburgh. Rejoining the Paris Agreement will do little to affect the climate and will harm the livelihoods of everyday Americans all across the country." He wasn't the only Republican to openly thrash the environmental shift, with Representative Nicole Maliotakis tweeting, "It's unbelievable that President Biden's first actions would be one that benefits communist China. I'm all for energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but the Paris Accord requires the USA to cut emissions by 2025, while China doesn't need to do squat until 2030. #America First." Ted Cruz expects Biden's commitment to the Paris Agreement to eclipse that of his Democratic predecessor, Barack Obama, saying, "Regulations necessary to meet the original commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement would result in the loss of 400,000 American manufacturing jobs and would cost families of four $20,000 in lost income over a nearly 20-year period." Biden also halted the United States' departure from the World Health Organization. Trump had moved to terminate the relationship with the UN body over the organization's bias towards China and its acceptance of early narratives about the virus. The Trump administration criticized World Health Organization officials' praise of China's, quote, transparency, the ignoring of warnings about the virus from Taiwan, and its echoing of Chinese claims that COVID-19 could not be spread from person to person. Trump also pointed to opposition from World Health Organization officials against his decision to place a travel ban on China in the initial days of the pandemic.
We have detailed the reforms that it must make and engage with them directly, but they have refused to act. Because they have failed to make the requested and greatly needed reforms, we will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs.
The US had been a top contributor to the agency, paying approximately $450 million per year. Democrat Chuck Schumer, now the Senate Majority Leader, lauded Biden for executive orders that unwind Trump-era policies. Over the last 4 years, the previous administration took enormous steps backwards. One of the first things we must do is undo the Trump regression, and executive orders are one of the most effective tools to accomplish just that, Schumer said in a statement. We must use every tool in our toolbox, including executive orders, tailor-made to quickly undo some of the most egregious policies the previous administration implemented, to address the multiple crises we face, deliver immediate relief to American families, and put us back on a path to a more prosperous and equitable country. From reversing the heinous Muslim ban and inhumane family separation policies, to re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement, mitigating the spread of COVID-19, and accelerating vaccine distribution. The executive orders announced by the Biden-Harris administration today are just the beginning. Between orders to return to the World Health Organization and the Paris Agreement, an upheaval of environmental and immigration policy, Biden's first week made it apparent. He's distancing himself from Trump's America First objective. And as Biden swore in his staff, he was quick to warn his statecraft would come with an ironclad caveat.
If you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. On the spot. No ifs, ands, or buts. Everybody is entitled to be treated with decency and dignity. That's been missing in a big way.
So much for freedom of speech.
Every American deserves to have their voice heard in a respectful and peaceful way. That is your First Amendment right.
Erasing Donald Trump's legacy isn't just Joe Biden's quest. Democrats, tech giants, and many on the left are piling on the 45th president. After the November election, tech giants increasingly cracked down on Trump's ability to speak to Americans through his principal means of communication, social media. Then, in his final weeks, after a violent rally in Washington, D.C., things got messy. Thousands gathered at a Save America rally.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen.
Shortly after, a pro-Trump mob, now branded insurrectionists, stormed the Capitol building in an act of, quote, domestic terrorism, leaving 5 people dead, more injured, and a nation divided. Twitter and Facebook, among other tech giants, took the extra measure of banning Trump from their platforms. The ban, which the companies claim was due to the risk of further incitement of violence, was combined with Amazon and Google's attempts to restrict access to the conservative social network site, Parler, which is seen as an alternative to Twitter.
I also want to say a few words about the unprecedented assault on free speech we have seen in recent days. These are tense and difficult times. The efforts to censor, cancel, and blacklist our fellow citizens are wrong, and they are dangerous. What is needed now is for us to listen to one another, not to silence one another.
Activists were so outraged by the actions at Capitol Hill, they kicked off a campaign to erase Trump's cameo in Home Alone 2 and replace his likeness with someone less divisive. Adding to the tweets, a Change.org petition is asking Disney to replace Trump with Biden.
Excuse me, where's the lobby? Thanks.
Democrats also made it abundantly clear they want to punish Trump over the Capitol siege. Within a week of the attack, he became the first president to be impeached twice, after 10 of his fellow Republicans joined Democrats in the House of Representatives to charge him with inciting an insurrection at the Capitol. The Democrat-controlled House passed a single article of impeachment, a formal charge, 232 to 197, focused on the speech he delivered to thousands of supporters shortly before the Capitol was attacked and pillaged.
The president incited an insurrection against Congress to prevent the peaceful transition of power.
And then he sat back and watched the insurrection.
Insurrection, a violent mob.
A white supremacist president who incited a white supremacist insurrection.
An insurrection against our government.
The violent attack on the U.S. Capitol was an act of insurrection.
The insurrection that violated the sanctity of the people's capital.
This was not a protest. This was an insurrection.
The ayes are 232. The nays are 197. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
If Trump is convicted in the Senate, he can be prevented from running for office in the future, meaning the Democrats will have knocked out their strongest presidential competition for good.
If the former president is convicted, there will be a vote to disqualify him from future office.
Some perks given to former presidents as well, such as funding for an office, travel, and staff, can be removed. But there are caveats to the Democrats' attempt to blame Trump for the attack by a small legion of his supporters. The question of impeachment of a former president has never come up. More importantly, the Constitution says nothing about impeaching a former president. What the Constitution says is, the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Republicans said they would make the case in the Senate that Trump's impeachment as a former president is unconstitutional.
I think the unconstitutional argument is persuasive. I'm hoping a Democrat or two will believe that impeaching a president out of office is bad for the presidency, bad for the country as a whole. So my hope is that if we do get the articles of impeachment, that we move forward quickly. We're not going to do two things at once. We're not going to enact the Biden agenda in the morning, impeach President Trump in the afternoon. If the articles come to the Senate, we will focus on them exclusively. I look forward to making the argument that this is unconstitutional, and we'll see what happens.
I think it's obvious that the post-presidential impeachment's never occurred in the history of the country for a reason, that it's unconstitutional.
First chance I get to vote to end this trial, I'll do it, because I think it's really bad for America. If you want to hold people accountable, there's other ways to do it, particularly for presidents, including, as I said, the perspective of history, and even now as people are learning more about all this. But it's really bad. When you talk about situations like this is not a criminal justice trial. This is a political process. And ultimately, it is a political process that's going to inject things into our public discourse, into our debates, that's going to make it harder to get important things done, and is just going to continue to fuel these divisions that have paralyzed the country and have turned us into a country of people that hate each other.
Following through with their promise, Republicans in the Senate voted against pressing onward with the second impeachment of Trump, indicating how they might vote in the trial. But the procedural vote that would have declared the impeachment proceedings unconstitutional was blocked 55 to 45.
Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution says, "The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors." Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 states, "When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside." As of noon last Wednesday, Donald Trump holds none of the positions listed in the Constitution. He is a private citizen. The presiding officer is not the Chief Justice, nor does he claim to be. His presence and the Chief Justice's absence demonstrate that this is not a trial of the President, but of a private citizen. Therefore, I make a point of order that this proceeding, which would try a private citizen and not a president, a vice president, or civil officer, violates the Constitution and is not in order.
By constitutional text, precedent, and common basic sense, it is clearly and certainly constitutional to hold a trial for a former official. Former President Trump committed, in the view of many, including myself, the gravest offense ever committed by a president of the United States.
But even if it's not unconstitutional, Trump may not end up being blamed for the attack on the Capitol.
My belief is that what the president said at the rally is not incitement under the law, that the people who defiled the Capitol made a conscious choice to do so. They should be held accountable. And the question that needs to be asked of Speaker Pelosi, regardless of the reason people came to the Capitol, how could an unarmed mob 20 years after 9/11 occupy the House and the Senate? That, to me, needs to be talked about a lot, not just during impeachment, but afterwards. How could it be 20 years after 9/11, a group of unarmed people could literally take over the Capitol during a joint session of Congress? I'd like to see what she says about that.
Some of these people, they're just talking like they are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They are very upset about what happened last week, and they're quite shaken by it. So it's not very rational. The president, of course, has denied any responsibility, and in many senses, you can't blame the protesters. You can't blame him for what the protesters did. It was a protest that just morphed into a mob scene, and then after that, it was just everybody for himself. Now, I get the impression that the Democrats are determined to hurt Donald Trump as much as they can. I think they're trying to make the president radioactive. They're just trying to destroy him and all the people around him. And there's not a moderate left in the place.
Will you get 17 Republicans to vote for this article?
No, and I question if all the Democrats would be there. Think about it. They have demoralized the whole concept of impeachment. We watched the political impeachment that they had early. Now we had no hearing, no investigation, but a simple movement to it, and now moving over the Senate, the Supreme Court Justice will not even preside. And they're taking up valuable time when America needs to do something different.
Biden campaigned for the White House on a pledge to restore bipartisanship and unity, and called for an end to the, quote, uncivil war in America in his inauguration speech.
We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this.
But when asked if pressing on with impeachment would undercut Biden's unity message and alienate Republicans, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected the concerns, saying she's, quote, not worried about that.
The fact is, the President of the United States committed an act of incitement of insurrection. I don't think it's very unifying to say, oh, let's just forget it and move on. That's not how you unify. Joe Biden said it beautifully. If you're going to unite, you must remember. And we must bring this in. And look, that's our responsibility, to uphold the integrity of the Congress of the United States. That's our responsibility, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that is what we will do. And just because he's now gone, thank God, that you don't say to a president, do whatever you want in the last months of your administration. You're going to get a get out of jail card free because people think we should make nice and forget that people died here on January 6th, that the attempt to undermine our election, to undermine our democracy, to dishonor our Constitution. No, I don't see that at all. I think that would be harmful to unity.
Rather than begin the national healing that the country so desperately needs, Democrats seek vengeance and political retaliation instead. The second impeachment trial will only spell disaster if it goes ahead, soaking up the Senate's time for an almost impossible-to-pass vote, throwing away taxpayer dollars, bogging down the passage of legislation and confirmations, while angering Republicans and Trump supporters who have already taken a beating at the loss of their president. If Biden really wants unity, and not to unify Republicans against him, stopping the impeachment and proving he's truly ready to be bipartisan, rather than starting a fight from the beginning of his administration, would be a good first step. But he's so far failed to take the first opportunity as president to stick to his words by calling on Democrats to end the impeachment. As Biden himself said, unity requires more than words. Perhaps it's time to lead by example.
To restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity.
Well, he doesn't have the ability or doesn't have the will to stand the left down. These executive actions, I think, are going to make us less energy independent. It's going to hurt the economy, but that's a political debate. President Biden could, by picking up the phone, stand down impeachment. He could say to Speaker Pelosi, President Trump is in Florida. I'm ready to move on. It's time for the country to move on. His refusal to do that shows me that he really doesn't have the ability or the willingness to unify us, because that would be a layup. So I believe that Republicans are going to unite strongly around the idea that this is an unconstitutional effort to impeach President Trump, and that in the coming days we will get this trial behind us.
Some of these people, they're just talking like they are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They are very upset about what happened last week, and they're quite shaken by it. So it's not very rational. The president, of course, has denied any responsibility, and in many senses, you can't blame the protesters. You can't blame him for what the protesters did. It was a protest that just morphed into a mob scene, and then after that, it was just everybody for himself. Now, I get the impression that the Democrats are determined to hurt Donald Trump as much as they can. I think they're trying to make the president radioactive. They're just trying to destroy him and all the people around him, and there's not a moderate left in the place.
Republicans say pressing forward with impeachment in the Senate will destroy Biden's rhetoric about unity immediately and delay indefinitely, if not forever, the healing of the nation.
I think the trial is stupid. I think it's counterproductive. We already have a flaming fire in this country, and it's like taking a bunch of gasoline and pouring it on top of the fire. So I think obviously fairness is important, no matter who it is we're talking about. But I just want to repeat, I think this is going to be really bad for the country. It's going to take us, not just is it going to keep us from focusing on really important things, but it's also just going to stir it up even more and make it even harder to get things done moving forward.
This impeachment trial, I think, is a really bad idea. Yesterday President Biden gave really soaring rhetoric about unity, about coming together. And it seems that Senate Democrats, the response that they have to that is they want to start the new Congress, the very first thing, with a vindictive and punitive impeachment trial. I don't think that reflects the priorities of the American people. We had a lot of work to do. We're in the middle of twin crises, a global health pandemic and an economic crisis with millions of people out of work. But instead of focusing on those jobs, the congressional Democrats seem obsessed with their hatred for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has left the White House. He's no longer president. And I think they need to put their partisan hatred aside and focus on actually working for the American people, getting America back to work, helping small businesses.
In fact, impeachment has been so aggressively used by the Democrats against Trump, it's already triggered retaliation. Republican Congressman Marjorie Taylor Greene has already filed articles of impeachment against Joe Biden, alleging abuse of power when he served as vice president. She says Biden withheld $1 billion in US aid to Ukraine in order to prevent investigation into his son Hunter's business dealings in the country.
Filed articles of impeachment on President Joe Biden. We'll see how this goes.
Removing Trump's policies and preventing him from ever running for office again isn't enough to satisfy the left. Blameless Republicans, including the 74 million Trump voters, are being lumped together with the Capitol rioters. It's not enough to just arrest and punish the lawbreakers who smashed their way into the Capitol. No, the left wants to, quote, deprogram Republicans and Trump supporters to erase Trumpism from the American psyche.
So here's the situation, though. We have, there are millions of Americans, almost all white, almost all Republicans, who somehow need to be deprogrammed. It's as if they are members of a cult, the Trumpist cult, and who have to be deprogrammed.
Okay, and as much as I'm worried about these loons who break into government, I'm actually more worried about the loons who did get elected. Because, I mean, what do you do about these people? There's 147 Republicans in Congress who still don't concede that Trump lost the election. What do you do about people who are in the government who don't believe in our way of government?
It is so shocking. Not only are they not conceding, Bill, but there's thoughts that there might have been some collusion among members of Congress. Some are refusing to go through magnometers or whatever you call them to check for weapons. They're not wearing masks during the siege. I mean, it's really bizarre, isn't it, when you think about how AWOL so many of these members of Congress have gotten. But I also think some of them are believing the garbage that they are being fed 24/7 on the internet by their constituents, and they bought into this big lie. And the question is, how are we going to really almost deprogram these people who have signed up for the cult of Trump?
Experts say they see cult-like behavior in Trump's most extreme supporters. Do you consider those people cult members?
I do. I think they were deceptively recruited by an authoritarian political cult. The bottom line is all of America needs programming because we've all been negatively influenced by Donald Trump.
The former Facebook chief security officer called on big tech and major carriers to effectively deplatform right-wing outlets in the name of purging misinformation.
What's happening is people are able to seek out the information that makes them feel good. That is what's happening, is that people have so much choice now. They can choose what their news sources are. They can choose what influencers they want to follow. And they can try to seal out anything that helps them question that. We have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN, and they are extremely radical and pushing extremely radical views. And so it's up to the Facebooks and YouTubes in particular to think about whether or not they want to be effectively cable networks for disinformation. And then we're going to have to figure out the OANN and Newsmax problem.
In his inaugural address, Biden spoke about a rise of political extremism, of white supremacy and domestic terrorism that he said we must confront and we will defeat. But roping all Republicans in with the actions of a minority that stormed the Capitol only demonizes half of America. Yet Democrat Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says now is the time to de-radicalize Trump supporters.
The first question is from Suzanne McGillicuddy from Pelham Bay, and she asked, how can we communicate with the many people who believe in conspiracy theories, but who weren't a part of the attack? How can we help them to understand the truth that there was no election fraud and that Trump misled them?
There are a lot of questions I see here in the chat that are variants of this. How do we talk to some of these folks that have been radicalized by Trump's base? What do we do about this, et cetera, in the future? And I think that we're going to be hearing a lot from a lot of experts in the best ways to de-radicalize people. But one thing that there are a couple of things that I will say about this. One is that I think our community recognizes, and I see here in the chat that, the language that you all are using, you all understand very clearly that this is not a problem that's going to go away January 20th. This doesn't go away with an inauguration. It doesn't go away the day after an inauguration. And there are people who are radicalized right now, and it is going to take a very long time. And it's going to take a long time and a lot of effort to de-radicalize those people. Now, that is not to say that all hope is lost. We had a program addressing white supremacists that we had programs, federal programs, that went towards funding organizations like these that de-radicalized people. And President Trump pulled the plug on federal funding for some of these programs. And so one thing that we know is that we have to get that funding right back up, and we probably need to double, triple, quadruple, or increase funding for these de-radicalization programs.
As for Trump, his future remains unclear for now.
We will be back in some form.
When President Trump said very coyly, I'll be back in some way, we'll be back in some way, what he meant was one of the kids would be back if he doesn't come back.
Philip Ritchie, Sky News.